What's going on, everybody? Teej back again with another video, and today we're talking about my updated 2022-2023 record predictions, playoff picks, and obviously we're going to get to the Super Bowl as well. And hopefully you all enjoyed today's video. If you do, be sure to hit that like button. It really would help me out a ton. If you're new around here, we've made it to the regular season. A lot of exciting content ahead. Be sure to hit that big red subscribe button for more football stuff in your life. And give me your takes down below in the comment section. I'll go through some 50-50 games for every team, but obviously there are going to be games that you don't like that, your favorite team's losing or your favorite team's winning. Love to have your takes. Love to have your thoughts down below in the comment section. It's a conversation, so let's talk about this season down below. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. We'll more so do this division by division, as at this point you've heard my takes on all these teams, and we'll kind of go over the 50-50 games as we look over every team's schedule. Starting with the Buffalo Bills, I got them at 15-2. That's definitely high praise, but probably the best team in the NFL. In totality, in my opinion, the best roster in the AFC, and superstar quarterback, one of the best head coaches in the NFL, good front office. Yeah, there's a lot of things to like. So looking at the schedule, this Miami game, obviously these division games are an interesting one. I have them at 6-0 in the AFC East. That's probably not going to happen. So, maybe you flip one of the Jets games, specifically this one here, week 14, or, this Dolphins game here, week 15. Maybe that's in the cards. I could see that. But right now I get the losses to the Bengals, and then obviously a week 1 loss to the Rams. I actually, think defending Super Bowl champs get it done week 1 on their home turf. So a lot of winning streaks there in the middle for the Bills, but obviously they could break out a lot of different ways. This Kansas City game, 50-50. Packers game could go either way. Even the Vikings maybe could make it interesting depending on, the secondary and, the health of that group at that point of the year for the Bills. So a lot of interesting games, but again, I think it's one of the best teams in the NFL. So then moving on to the Miami Dolphins, this is one that's changed a fair amount. I believe I had them at 6 wins when I initially did this, and I was really kind of frustrated with, how do I flip some of these games? You add that much talent to the overall roster. You sign a Teron Armstead, sign a Connor Williams, you bring in a Tyreek Hill, you sign a Mike McDaniels as your head coach. That offense is going to be better. So, and especially with Hill and Waddle, if teams are going to try to, continue in the trend of running a lot of too high, those two guys are so twitchy after the catch. It feels like this Miami offense, one way or another, is built to give defenses trouble, whether it's through the yak game against a lot of cover 2s and, too high shells, cover 4s, things like that, or if it's just with speed, because they're not going to do that. They're not respecting the deep ball, and Tyreek and Jalen Waddle, you got to respect that speed. So it feels like a unique offense. It's just got to come down to Tua, because this team could go all the way up to 11 wins. If Tua takes a step forward, we could flip this Minnesota game. We could flip something like maybe this 49ers game could be an interesting one. Also the Dolphins signed Trey Flowers, adding one more threat to that defense. Can Jalen Phillips take a step forward? So a lot of question marks across the entire roster, but they do have a daunting schedule. Where like maybe you could flip this 49ers game, still playing San Francisco, the Chargers at LA. Obviously 2 games against the Bills. We talked about that earlier. You could totally flip one of those division games. Packers are a tough opponent, and even some of the early games, like you could flip this Minnesota one, like we said earlier, but you get the Bills within the first 3 weeks, and then you get the Bengals right after on a short week. That's tough. So 9 wins feels about right. We'll also have to see, obviously, the injury to Byron Jones, going to miss the first 4 weeks. That makes it interesting, especially these games. The Bills and the Bengals without Xavier Howard, without Byron Jones, that's going to be tough sledding. Moving on to the Patriots, I'd love to give them more wins. I'm sorry, New England fans, but I am really concerned about the perimeter talent, both on offense and defense. Just, the wide receiver room, it may be deep, but it lacks a dude who can win you a game. And I think we play in an NFL where you need 2 ones, and they are absent of one. And then on the other side, even if they're playing more zone, you still need playmakers at that point at the cornerback spot in a zone-heavy defense, and Jalen Mills is not that guy. Terrence Mitchell is not that guy. So just concerned in a lot of different fronts, specifically on the perimeter, but you could easily flip the Steelers game, especially if Mitch Trubisky is Mitch Trubisky of old. That game may be in Pittsburgh, but maybe you flip that over to New England. One of these Jets games, I have them as a division split, and I have them going 1-5 in the division, so that's being swept by the Dolphins and swept by the Bills, which the Bills are one of the best teams in the league. 2 is actually 3-0 against Bill Belichick, but this feels like a year where Bill Belichick's going to get a win eventually against Tua, especially if he continues to be the guy we've seen before, a flawed quarterback. So you can flip one of those games. You can flip that Steelers, game, and next thing you know, this team's 8-9, game away from being over 500. So it could definitely go a lot of different ways. Also, this Colts game is a 50-50 one that I thought about, and It's middle of the season, so it's impossible to predict, injuries, but that honestly could be what dictates, picking a favorite in this game, because I'm not necessarily high on either one of these two teams. It just happens the Colts play in an easier division, so, I'll give them the win here in this case. That's not necessarily to come down the division, but, some of these other 50, this Raiders game could go either way. Bill Belichick's had a ton of success against his disciples. Who's to say that can't continue against Josh McDaniels? But that being said, I also have them stealing a game against the Bengals, so as much of these, 50-50 losses, I also gave them one and a win there. So it's a tough Patriots team to get a gauge on, and really it's going to come down to, how much better can Mac Jones get in year two? Because if it's just kind of the continuation of what we saw last year, all right, he's good, but he's not going to, outperform the weaknesses on the rest of the roster. Now, if he becomes an elite processor, becomes that much better, then sure, they might be able to put some of those troubled areas by the wayside. Let me get to the Jets. 4 wins feels pretty low because this could be a sneaky 8-win team if Zach Wilson takes a substantial step forward. Obviously hurt, he's going to miss some time, and you can see I have him getting out to an 0-3 start. Kind of brutal. They have 3 division games to open. Now, of course, you can flip that Browns game week 2 because that's going to be Jacoby Brissett, and you could be having Zach Wilson making his first start of the year. So if Wilson looks good, the surrounding core around him has certainly improved. The defense has improved as well. It's also another year for Robert Saleh as the head coach, another year for Mike LaFleur as an OC. You feel more confident about those two in their respective positions. So I could totally see that week 2 game flipping, but at the same time, the Jets don't have a game wrecker in a Myles Garrett, and the offensive line. All in all, I think I'd probably lean Cleveland there, and I'm excited about Garrett Wilson, Elijah Moore, but Amari Cooper is a more proven commodity to what we know right now. We'll see. Obviously, this is early on in the season, but for all we know, Garrett Wilson could be unbelievable week 1, and I could be changing my tune. But as it stands right now, Cooper is the most known commodity. So I'm leaning towards, the Browns roster being a little bit better than what the Jets have, but it's going to come down to that QB position, obviously. Again, these division games, I got them 1-5 in the division. They could obviously, take one of 2 from the Bills and, maybe a surprise game, or 1 of 2 from the Patriots. So all that is totally plausible. Even down the stretch, if the Vikings secondary is struggling, and again, Wilson is playing well, those wide receivers, that's one of those games I could totally flip if the Jets become an 8-win team. The Lions, obviously one that I think could flip. The Jags, maybe you're saying right now, well, the Jets are better than the Jags as is, so you could totally flip that game as well. So right now I got them at 4 wins, but this could easily be a 7-8-win team, and that's kind of, again, the whole talking point here is ranges really 4-7, but all in all, when you look at my AFC East, Bills, Dolphins, Pats, Jets, that's how I think it'll play out. Moving on to the AFC North now, Baltimore Ravens, I think one of the best teams in the AFC. I got them at 13-4, getting out to a hot start. Again, you could flip some of these AFC East opponents. The Dolphins, we'll have to see what Tua looks like. We'll have to see what Mac Jones looks like for the Patriots, so you could flip those. But then also division games, 4-2 in the division. I think that's a split against the Steelers and the Bengals. Also, the Browns are totally live. They could lose this game week 15. By then, you're talking about Deshaun Watson under center for the Browns. So handful of 50-50 games. But that being said, even if you like giving the Ravens a loss to the Browns, they could totally sweep the Steelers. There is a talent disparity. So 12-13 wins feels about right for Baltimore. That leads me to the Bengals, which again, that 12-win window feels about right. Give it, 11-13, a game on each side. I think that's about where the Bengals are. This Cowboys game is going to be a really fun one right away. This Saints one, these, NFC, AFC, clashes, obviously 50-50 games, and it'll just depend on what team shows up that day and who's, the better team that given day. This week 8 game against the Browns, maybe you flip this one because this is going to be Jacoby Brissett, but division games can be weird. It's Monday Night Football. I'll give the Browns a bone here, but that's totally one of those games you flip, or you could flip. But that being said, if you give the Bengals that win, you could also totally give them, a loss to the Bucs. So where I gave them maybe a disadvantageous loss, I also kind of gave them an advantageous win against one of the best teams in the NFL, in my opinion, with the Buccaneers. So again, double-digit win team in my opinion, and that 11-13 window is kind of where I got them right now. The Browns are a lot harder to gauge because obviously no Deshaun Watson for a significant portion of the season, and specifically week 1 and 2 could flip really quick. Like, as much as I am excited about Myles Garrett potentially, giving the wake-up call to Akim Ekwonu, welcome to the NFL, Akim Ekwonu struggled in pass protection this preseason, and as much as I did like him as a prospect, he does feel like a work in progress, and we're seeing that in the pass protection, component of his game. Myles Garrett might go crazy. And that's kind of why I lean in Browns week 1, but that being said, you hear Baker Mayfield said, I'm going to kick their ass. And I mean, I'm ready to run through a brick wall. Like, I'm ready to see that. So we'll talk about the Panthers later on, but that game could be flipped. Again, of Zach Wilson, that first game, week 2, looks really good, elevates the Jets and a pretty solid ecosystem around him. That game could become a loss for the Browns. So quickly from 8-9, you're talking about a 6-11 team, right? So that's going to be tough. And, with Jacoby Brissett, the Falcons could make it interesting. So some of these 50-50 games, especially with Jacoby Brissett under center, is going to be an interesting one to watch. And I mean, that's, assuming at the time of this recording, the restructured deal for Jimmy G has been made. If anything, I think he becomes more tradable. Maybe that was a move to where it's like, hey, Seattle, we're not letting him go. You're going to have to give us a 6 or a conditional something. And maybe the same thing for Cleveland, where it's like, hey, he's not making $25 million. He's more appealing to trade for now. So possibly, but it's really tough to gauge, what this Browns team is going to look like with Jacoby Brissett, because he's fine. He's probably a top 40 quarterback in the NFL, but still is one of the better backups. You're playing with a disadvantage despite having a good roster. So right now I got him at 8-9, but it could definitely be a slippery slope, even worse record. Then you get to the Steelers, 7-10. I do think this is the end of the Mike Tomlin run of winning records, or at least non-losing seasons. I think there's too many hoops to jump through. It's a weak cornerback room, it's a weak offensive line, and question marks at quarterback. It just feels hard to have a winning record with that much problems in those 3 specific areas. But that being said, these 50-50 games, you could totally flip this Jets game. A lot of Steelers fans are going to tell me how Pittsburgh has no business losing at home to the Jets, and as a Steelers fan, I would tend to agree, but the Jets are not going to go winless this year, and again, there's talent on that roster. It's not your dad's Jets team here. The Dolphins could be an interesting one. Specifically talking matchups, like assuming that Byron Jones is healthy, Byron Jones and Xavier Howard versus the Steelers wide receivers, I'd probably lean maybe the edge going talent-wise to the Dolphins, but also it's easier to play offense than defense. So that's just going to be a fun battle of skill position groups. The Steelers getting this Eagles game, I'm pretty high on the Eagles this year, but Pittsburgh lost to Philadelphia last time they played, I guess 4 years ago, so kind of feels like the pendulum's going to swing the other way, just variance being variance. Saints, maybe the Steelers could steal that one at home, but I'm also pretty high on the Saints. Got them beating the Panthers, but I also talked about my season preview. I could see Pittsburgh, if Dan Moore does not take a step forward, the cornerbacks are picked apart, and if TJ Watt misses any significant time, that pass rush takes a hit, therefore leading the secondary to be picked apart. I could see this quickly becoming a 5-win team, and maybe this Panthers game is one that you could flip. Again, we're going to come back to Carolina because I think a lot of Panthers fans are going to be upset with their record, but 7-10, last place in the division. It's also a really good division. That's what makes it that much harder. 2-4 division record. Just when you stack them up, the 4 teams, the Browns with Deshaun Watson, Bengals, Ravens, they are the weakest of the 4. Taking Deshaun Watson out of the equation, I still think I like the Browns roster a little bit more than Pittsburgh's, but that one's a little closer. So let's leave the AFC North. Let's start talking about the best division in football here, the AFC West. I guess I got the Chargers start the year 8-0. That doesn't feel probable, but totally plausible. So, in that case, maybe you switch the Chiefs games and you make this like a home and home victor series, with the Chiefs taking week 2 at home Thursday Night Football. And, I changed the right game. Week 11, Chargers retaliate with a home win. I just did it here for the sake of the video, just for funsies. But 3-3 in the division, I could totally see this being, a split down the board, with maybe the Raiders being the one team that's not 3-3. But that being said, one of the best teams in the NFL, and right now my pick to win the AFC West. So love the roster as a whole, but some of these 50-50 games, obviously the 49ers, you could break that one. If the Chargers take a substantial step forward in run defense, that game becomes a whole lot more interesting. I have them splitting with the Raiders. The Chargers could totally just sweep Vegas. Have them losing to the Rams. There's no real home team there, but maybe the Chargers come away with a win there. The Dolphins, always going to be an interesting one, especially given that 2 wide receiver, so much speed. Jalen Ramsey can only cover one of them. So, Jalen Waddle versus whoever that number 2 corner is going to end up being for the Rams by that point in the season. That could be a mismatch, and that could be one where the Dolphins, find the edge and come away with a road win there. So those are some of the 50-50 games, but, that 12-win mark feels about LA this year. And then we get to the Chiefs, and one of the best teams in football. I know they got a lot of moving pieces. No more Tyreek Hill. They're having to change what that offense looks like, but 11 wins. I definitely think they're going to be double-digit win caliber, 10+. I am 3-3 in the division, so let's go ahead and start running through the schedule. Hot start, then they fall short to the Bucs. That's going to be a fun game. You could put that in the 50-50 category. I think it is going to take some time for the Chiefs wide receivers and Patrick Mahomes to really figure out whose role is what. I could be wrong there. Maybe they hit the ground running. But that was part of why I had the Chargers winning the earlier matchup against the Chiefs. But, we switched it. We'll roll with it. But maybe that leads to, despite me thinking the Chiefs are a pretty superior team compared to the Cardinals, maybe that game's close just because, there's some drops in there and that ends some drives early or some miscommunications and Patrick Mahomes interceptions as a result. So I could see that. Also, maybe the Colts game plays a little closer despite me having a lot more faith in the Chiefs as a Super Bowl contender than the Colts. Speculating there, but I'm feeling pretty good about the Bucs and Tampa Bay at home. Yeah, I think the Bucs can win that one. Again, we talked about this Bills game. That could truly be a flip of a coin. That could go either way. I got the Chiefs edging out San Francisco. That could change without a doubt. Specifically, if there's injuries at linebacker or Chris Jones misses any time, or if the Chiefs' run defense just takes a step back. Shanahan's rushing attack is so hard to slow down, and if there's anything working against the Chiefs there, it could be a long day defensively. And then some of these other games, the Titans game, Kansas City fits. I don't foresee that happening again, but anything's possible there. The Rams game obviously could go either way. Both these Broncos games could be interesting. And then I have us as a division split with the Raiders. Chiefs swept them last year. You could totally give Kansas City another win there and take one away from the Raiders. Now let's move on to the Broncos. This is a really tough team to play at home, and that's part of why you see 3-0 start with 2 wins coming at home. But those are also the Texans not a great opponent, but the 49ers are a stout opponent. So nothing to scoff at there. But as much as Denver's a tough place to play year round, but especially early in the year, from the things I've heard players say and coaches say, it feels that much more extreme as you're not in peak condition. So yeah, definitely give me the Broncos when they're playing at home, and that's part of why I have the Raiders winning that game in Vegas, and then the Broncos bounce back and get them in Week 11. So also one of the determining factors and why I had them over the Colts. It's also a Thursday night game, so I tend to be a little more favorable to home teams playing Thursday night football in that short week. Another game that could totally flip. Again, we'll see if the Titans are better than I expect. That game could be interesting. This Ravens game, sorry, I scrolled too far there, but the Ravens-Broncos game, maybe the Ravens can steal it, the Broncos can steal it in Baltimore. That could be interesting. And then this Cardinals game, kind of a weird one for the Broncos to lose there, but the Cardinals, again, I don't think they're going to be like a 4-win team, so I got to find wins for them. And maybe later in the year, this is one of those random ones. Now that I look at it, given the tendencies late season downfalls that we've seen from the Cardinals, I'm not feeling great about it, but maybe that's one you flip back and that gets the Broncos to 12 wins. But then the Rams, Chiefs, and Chargers to end the year, we're going to get a really good sample if the Broncos are truly a playoff caliber team. I mean, we're going to get it early on too, but those last 3 games, we're going to see if they can hang. And then last team in the AFC West, let's talk about the Raiders. And I actually have them at 10-7. Like, I have all 4 teams in that division hitting double-digit wins. That speaks to how much I like these teams. Granted, since then, the offensive line concerns have grown that much more from that original video. Denzel Good's retired. Now Alex Leatherwood's been released. So, if Lester Cotton is starting somewhere on your offensive line, I have a little bit of a concern there, a little bit of a wee-woo. But also the trade of Trayvon Mullen, I'm that much more concerned about the cornerback room. So, questions that it'll take time to find the answers here. So, maybe 10 wins is a little bit outside the picture here. But that being said, that offense could be absolutely loaded. So, no reason to doubt what Derek Carr, Devontae Adams, Darren Waller, Josh McDaniels can all cook up. So maybe that leads to this Titans-Raiders game being flipped. But again, I do respect that Titans defense a lot, specifically in the secondary. So if there's a team that could come up with some answers against that passing attack, they could be it. But also, the Raiders really bad against the run. Derrick Henry, the best thing on the Titans offense. So I like Tennessee matchup-wise there, despite me thinking the Raiders are probably a little bit better of a team. The Saints game could truly go either way. Flip a coin, and I'm good with whatever comes up, heads or tails there. Rams, I think, I think I would take them as a team as a whole. I think a lot of people would. But, Thursday Night Football can be weird. And as much as I do lean towards home teams, that's not necessarily what the data or, records and winning percentages would point out. So absolutely not a long distance to travel for Vegas. They could totally steal that one from the Rams. And again, injuries will be a big, storyline once we get to that deep into the season. And in the Steelers game, maybe Pittsburgh's better than I expect, and that flips the other way. And like I said, I have the 1-1 split with Kansas City. That could totally be a series split for the Chiefs. And, that, and then you flip, maybe, what's one of these Raiders games I could flip the other way? You make it a sweep for Kansas City, and you give the Chargers a sweep. Sorry, I'm not trying to take too much of your time here, but a couple losses away, and this team has a different look. 10 wins, compared to 8, while it's only 2 wins, getting the double digits makes you feel that much better about the long-term projection of a team versus 8-9, first year's head coach. It feels like the rhetoric and the tone around the team would change pretty drastically there. But I still like the Raiders despite some of the moves they made. Let's move on to the AFC South. For my money, the worst division in football. I know, AFC South fans are going to point towards the NFC East, but I don't know. They don't have the Jags and the Texans in their division. So as much as I think the Giants are bad and the Commanders could potentially suck, I think that the Jags and Texans are still really rough teams. But anyways, we're talking about the Colts here. So 9-8, 5-1 in the division. I think that's really where the Colts kind of find some separation because I'm low on the Titans. Obviously, you just heard me not say positive things about the Jags and Texans. I think that's where the Colts kind of have an edge and will start to pile up some wins, especially in the first couple of weeks, get some momentum, and then you take on Kansas City, and maybe, hey, 2-0 start, you're feeling good going into a game at home against Kansas City. That game could be flipped. I could be convinced. Going to Denver in Week 5, we already talked about that game. That could be tricky. I have that as a 1-1 split between them and the Titans, but, I'm still anticipating the Colts defense to be really good, and I have concerns about, that wide receiver position in Tennessee, also some of the interior line spots, so it could flip the other way, without a doubt. So, also, Colts losing to the Commanders. This is, kind of that Carson Wentz rhetoric. I could totally see this being one of those games that goes Wentz with 3 picks, no touchdowns, and it's the revenge factor playing in. And I'll talk about this when I get to Washington. But predicting when Carson Wentz is going to be good and when Carson Wentz is going to be bad is nearly impossible. So seriously, in this video, focus on the records more so than the individual games. But I am running through the schedule just for the fun of it. Colts-Eagles, maybe at home I could see that one flipping. That could be an interesting one. Obviously, some of the surrounding storylines in that game are interesting. Frank Reich, former OC for the Eagles, and now the head coach of the Colts. So and then Nick Sirianni worked for Frank Reich in Indianapolis. He's now the head coach in Philadelphia. So that game's interesting. The Colts, realistically, are probably a better team than the Steelers. So Monday Night Football at home, I would probably lean towards Indianapolis, but I decided to give that one to Pittsburgh. Some of these other iffy games, maybe coming off a bye, they can win this game at Minnesota. Does help having that extra week of preparation. A late bye, too. That's an interesting one. That could bring some players back into the fold that were injured prior. So that's a fun one. And then a couple, you get the Chargers, then you get the Giants and Texans. So I think they'll end the season on a positive note. But I got them at 9-8, winning the division. Then we get to the Titans, and this team, 7-10 or 10-7. It feels like it's going to be one of those two quote-unquote extremes for me. I'm low in that wide receiver room. And, at the time of this recording, Harold Landry just went down with an injury, so I was already sus about that pass rush duo, and it just got that much more suspect. Yeah, this could be a tough year in Tennessee after being the 1 seed last season. But, the Bills week 2, tough draw. The Bills are just a better football team. Again, the 1-1 split with the Colts, that could be interesting. I have them beating the Commanders. I have the Colts losing to Washington. So, again, variance is hard to account for when it comes to Carson Wentz. And see, as much as I like their secondary, I was about to say this Bengals game, but I like Christian Fulton. Caleb Farley, if he's healthy, has a ton of talent. But, we're talking about the team that just made it to the Super Bowl, and they have 3 receivers deep. That just creates a really interesting matchup. Can Elijah Molden snap in and snap out be better than Tyler Boyd, one of the best slot wide receivers in football? As much as I like Molden, that's tough to put your money on. And as much as I like Christian Fulton, Jamar Chase has emerged as a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL. So that's a tough assignment for whoever it is. So that's where also it works against the Titans, as they were, the team that won the division. They get other division winners. So they get Kansas City. They get the Bengals. They get the Packers. So it's tough. And then also the divisions that they match up against outside of the AFC South or the AFC West in the AFC North. So that's brutal. That is just absolutely brutal. Having to see the Chargers and the Chiefs on your schedule, yeah, that's bad on a lot of different levels. And then, it gets a little easier down the stretch. The Jags game, obviously, maybe that creates some momentum going into a matchup against the Chargers. As much flack as Brandon Staley does get for the analytics, despite me being on his side, that could create a situation where you don't execute on a couple 4th downs and, favorable spots created and favorable field position and scoring opportunities there for the Titans. So if they execute and take advantage of it, they could steal that one on the road. Texans, that feels like a winnable game. You could flip this Cowboys game because, again, I think Dallas has regressed, just like I think Tennessee has taken steps back. Thursday Night Football, playing at home. You could give that one to the Titans, and then you get the Jags late. So, yeah, this could be a team that, in a weak division, 9-8 is good enough, maybe. We'll have to see what Matt Ryan looks like in Indianapolis. But right now, I got him at 7-10. I do think the Titans take a significant step back. Moving on to the Jags, I'll be quick on this one. I'd like to give this team more wins, but I'm who's that wide receiver one? You just traded Laviska, so is it Marvin Jones? Is it Christian Kirk? Is it Zay Jones? You paid those last two a lot of money, but that doesn't mean that doesn't make them a wide receiver one. Their play makes them a wide receiver one, not the money you pay them. Still holes on the offensive line. Like Jawan Taylor could still be a total headache at right tackle. He's given up a ton of sacks last 2 seasons as a starter. The defense is still flawed, specifically the safety spots. They have an interesting rotation at linebacker. Will that fully, come to form? So I think they are an improved team, but I don't know necessarily if that'll show up in the record column. So I could see this game flipping. Maybe, the Jags come out with an emphatic win week 1. It's like, hey, this is not Urban Meyer's team anymore. Maybe. But I'll take Washington at home. Again, I'm worried about that offensive line. And even if there is no Chase Young for the Commanders, I still think I'll take the talent across that pass rush set for the Commanders versus that offensive line in Jacksonville. And then, you get the Chargers, you get the Eagles in week 3 and 4. That's tough. Right now, I have a split between the Jags and Texans. One of those two teams could have the leg up on the other, but it's already hard to give these teams wins because naturally on paper they don't look as good as other teams. So I made it a split. Give me a break there. The Colts, I actually think I have the Colts splitting, or actually sweeping the Jags, excuse me. That's proved to be a headache and a bit of a complication for Indianapolis. So maybe that's one of the wins you can give Jacksonville is, the Jags week 2 come away with a home win against the Colts. They seem to be able to do that pretty consistently. So interesting. The Raiders, we'll see. And, the other, question here and the other wild card to play is like, how big of a year 2 leap is Trevor Lawrence? Like, as much as I am concerned about that wide receiver room, if Trevor Lawrence becomes elite this year, which it's in the cards, then I become immediately less concerned about who that wide receiver one's because Trevor Lawrence is going to elevate the play. And then that's where, the Raiders really worry about that secondary. That could be one at home. I could see the Jags stealing one, despite on paper, I like the Raiders more. The NFL's weird. Don't forget, the Browns, you want to give Baker Mayfield hate? They beat the Bengals 41-16 at one point last year. And that game almost makes no sense. And furthermore, Urban Meyer and the Jags beat the Bills 9-6. There's going to be weird games. So that could be one of the weird ones. Maybe you flip that one to Jacksonville. I wouldn't put my money on it right now. Right now I have them beating the Lions, but I'm also higher on the Lions and where they are in their rebuild process. So I'm being a little favorable there to Jacksonville. It's one of those 50-50 games I give in their favor. Cowboys, again, a team that's regressed. So, Trevor Lawrence elevates those around him. Could be one that they steal. And then, you get that Titans game at the very end of the season. And also a couple of wins. I could see this team being one that gets hot, wins 3 of their last 6. I could totally see that being one of the storylines and one of the rhetoric, talking points we carry into the offseason. Hey, the Jags started to figure it out late. Doug Peterson got them rallied. They beat the Lions. They beat the Jets. They beat the Texans. They took care of business against weaker opponents. I could see that. But I still think it's going to be a rough year ahead for Jacksonville. And same thing for Houston. But I think those two teams should embrace it, especially the Houston Texans. There's just more holes to fill. The Jags have spent so much money, and they're actually going to be negative cap going into next offseason, which fascinating. That's Trent Baalke, man. Give that guy more years as a GM. Said few and far between. But anyway, the Houston Texans, Baalke's catching strays. But I just think this is a bad team that should embrace a bad year, continue to accumulate draft talent. Like if a 3-14 record nets you Will Anderson at the top of next year's draft, that might be a net win long term. So, some of these games, you could flip this Bears game because I think they're both pretty bad teams. So, could totally flip that. Maybe they get both games against Jacksonville. Maybe. I could see it. This is the return of Deshaun Watson. What a storyline that would be, is the Texans taking down Deshaun Watson and the Browns in his first game. I would die to see that just for the memes of it. But that being said, doesn't feel likely. And also these division games are always weird. So they could steal one from the Titans. They could steal one from the Colts. All that is totally in the cards. But yeah, 3 wins for right now, I think, fits for where this team is at. Let's switch over to the NFC. Let's get to the Tampa Bay Bucks. Again, one of the best teams in the NFL, in my opinion. The 2 losses to the Saints, who continue to give them headaches. And then later on to the Bengals with a huge winning streak there in the middle. maybe this Ravens game goes the other way. Maybe the Rams continue their good play against the Bucs, beat them in the regular season last year, beat them in the playoffs obviously last year. Maybe could totally see that, and maybe the Saints make it a sweep, possible. But this does feel like it's pretty safe 11+ win team. But also, if we're gonna make it a little bit harder, this feels like a 12+ win team. The roster's there. Tom Brady's the most accomplished quarterback in NFL history. Do I need to say more? So let's get to the Saints, and I'm high on this team. Right now, I got about 11-6. That being said, if they suffer some key injuries, because this team does not have a whole lot of depth, whether that's on the offensive line, like Ryan Ramczyk goes down, that could be a yikes. If Cam Jordan gets hurt, that thins out that pass rush rotation a ton. If Demario Davis goes down, then Pete Werner's going to have to step up. If Marshawn Lattimore goes down, I'm really questioning that cornerback room. So this team feels like they're an injury away from being 6-11. That's basically the caveat I'm building in here. But right now, I got them at 11-6. Got that win against the Bucs. That could obviously go back the other way and make them 10-7. This Bengals game, high-powered offense against one of the best defenses in football. That's fun on paper, and also Dennis Allen, got to give him a ton of credit with what he's done with that unit. Have them losing the Cardinals, so that's one of those 50-50 games where it's like maybe not even 50-50, but maybe you give that one to New Orleans despite it short week being in Arizona. And then off of that, Raiders could make it compelling. Again, if there's an injury to Marshawn Lattimore, there's no one in the state of Louisiana that's touching Devontae Adams at that point, so could totally flip that one over to Vegas. These will be interesting games right here, week 11, 12, and 13. So again, if you're like, hey, the Saints are better than the Cardinals, sure, give them the win there, but then I'm going to take it away from their win against the Rams, because most people will probably power rank the Rams ahead of the Saints. So it works either way. That's why they're called 50-50 games. But got them beating the Rams at home. That's going to be a fun game. High-powered offense, high-powered defense again. And then you get the 49ers and you get the Bucs. We're going to learn a lot about, how playoff legitimate is New Orleans, and we'll find that out weeks 11 through 13. And then a little bit of an easier stretch. You get the Falcons. Deshaun Watson is in this game, so that'll be an interesting one. I have the Browns winning it, but that could totally be one that's flipped the other way. And I have them beating the Eagles. Ooh, I'm high on, but that game could go the other way. And then I got them ending the year on winning notes against the Carolina Panthers, which let's just go ahead and talk about this. So 4-13. I've had plenty of people, saying I'm high on Baker. I think the Panthers could easily be, 8-win team. I think they could be a sneaky playoff team. I think they could be a sneaky seven seed in the wild card mix, especially considering the NFC is open. I get all that. Ultimately, the reason I have them at 4 wins, their over/under prop I think is at 5.5, and I can understand why you would want to bet over on that, because Baker's a significant upgrade over the quarterback situation last year. Another year of DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson. They bring in Laviska Shenault, year 2, Terrence Marshall Jr. There's a lot to be excited about. Kim Aquano, struggling in pass protection, but all in all, that offensive line should be better. And the defense still has a lot of talent, and Phil Snow proved to be a really nice DC last year. I get all of it. I get it. But betting an over is saying this team's going to exceed expectations. And putting money on Matt Rule, and specifically Ben McAdoo as an OC, to exceed your expectations feels like lighting money on fire. So sorry to get serious there, but that's part of why I just have a hard time picking out games that the Panthers are going to win, especially considering their schedule, right? So off the jump, you could flip this game. If Kim Aquanu gets some help, some double teams against Myles Garrett, some chips, and he holds his own, and Myles Garrett doesn't completely wreck this game, Baker Mayfield with a chip on his shoulder, I could totally see that game being flipped. So then, boom, there's your 5th win. I just think all in all, the roster's a little bit better. And again, Myles Garrett versus Akim Aquanu could be disastrous for Akim Aquanu. Did give him a win against the Giants. That's, I guess a 50-50 game. I think I like Carolina where they are right now a little bit more. Division games are obviously weird, 1-5. So they could pick up some more wins against division opponents, and you wouldn't look too hard at it just because division games are weird. Cardinals game, Carolina at home. They added Trayvon Mullen for Arizona, but still that cornerback room, specifically on the outside, because Byron Murphy's a great slot corner, but the outside guys, still a little bit of a concern there in Arizona. So maybe that's a big DJ Moore day and a big day for Robbie Anderson hooking up with Baker Mayfield on some deep balls and stuff. Maybe. Some other interesting games, down the stretch. Obviously, the Falcons games are going to be interesting. What's another game that could flip? I got them with a win over the Seahawks. I had them losing to the Steelers. That game could totally flip because, again, have a ton of problems with the Steelers' secondary and cornerback room in specific. Those wide receivers for Carolina and Baker might go crazy. And obviously, Baker has seeing the Steelers a lot. And that being said, he has struggled a lot against the Steelers in his career. So that could work for or against him, depending on how you frame your rhetoric there. And then, a win against the Lions being a little nice because I think I like the Lions a little bit more. And then tough games to end the year with division opponents in Tampa Bay and New Orleans. So they have a really tough schedule. Like, they have the Bengals, they have the Rams, they have, the Rams, the Browns right away is not necessarily as tough as it might have been when we were looking at the schedule a couple months ago, but they also play in a division with 2 playoff teams, in my opinion, with the Bucs and Saints. So it's tough. It's tough. And again, it comes back to, I don't know if I would be able to put money on the over and have this team win 6 games because I don't trust Matt Rule, who fired Joe Brady because he wanted to run the ball more while Christian McCaffrey was hurt. Like, I just can't trust that type of decision maker with my money. And, Ben McAdoo, I again, don't have a lot of faith in him as an OC. Didn't look good in New York, and, I have tempered expectations for this season. And then lastly, Atlanta Falcons. We'll make this one quick. There's another one of those teams where, and we'll say the same thing about Seattle later on, embrace a bad year. You have too many holes in your roster. Embrace a bad year. Let's get into the offseason next year. Sign some free agents that make sense, younger guys, right contract deals, and then let's continue to draft well. I liked the Falcons draft last year. Let's continue that process, and a couple of years' time, I think this team will be back on track. So embrace a bad year. You could flip this Seahawks game. Absolutely, but I had to give some Seattle wins because they're not going to go winless, in my opinion at least. But then again, it's Bengals, that's a tough draw because the Falcons, I like AJ Terrell, and Casey Hayward could be a nice addition, but still that secondary is no match for that passing attack. We already talked about the Panthers. Again, Washington and Pittsburgh. It's going to be tough to gauge what Carson Wentz, does week in and week out. And for Pittsburgh, could be rookie Kenny Pickett, which is always going to be a wild card. So those games easily could flip. Those are some of the ones where if you think the Falcons are better than a 2-win squad, those are some of the games I think they could steal. And then obviously division games are weird. Maybe the Cardinals late in the year. Again, the Cardinals collapses have become kind of the trend of the last couple of seasons, basically during the Cliff Kingsbury era. So who's to say that trend stops, and who's to say the Falcons couldn't rob one from the Cards at home? Moving on to the NFC North, I still got the Packers at 13-4. I thought I was going to take a win away from here, but off these predictions, it's 4 straight 13-win years for Matt LaFleur, which just one of the best coaches in NFL history. If he were to do that, that would be such an unbelievable statement, and not one of those head coaches you'd look at and be like, yeah, that's a guy who won 13 games 4 years in a row, but it could be possible. But I have them actually losing to Minnesota week 1. I think it's just going to take some time for the wide receivers to gel. And tomorrow, at the time of you seeing this video, yes, tomorrow, you will see the very first episode of the Hurry Up Offense, our preview show. And one of my upset picks is going to be the Minnesota Vikings. They're also at home. I think that offense under Kevin O'Connell will have some fireworks to start the year while the wide receiver position still being figured out in Green Bay. But that being said, I do see it as a series split, 4-2 division record overall. They are leaps ahead of the Bears, and the other split obviously being with the Lions, and that might be a little kind to Detroit. You could totally give the Packers a win there. They could also sweep the Vikings. Maybe Green Bay hits the ground running, and it's no problem whatsoever the wide receiver spot. Totally possible. I have the Bucs winning in week 3. That's going to be an interesting game and a fun game. Again, the Packers wide receivers versus a great secondary in Tampa Bay. How does that look? That's going to be a fun battle. Then the Bills game week 8, you could call it 50-50, but I do like the Bills a little bit more right now. The Cowboys could make it interesting, but, this Packers defense is legit. So you're talking about a Dallas team that has some now question marks on the offensive line, and also Trevon Diggs had 11 picks last year. No guarantee he has that this year. Also, still, what's that number 2 corner position look like? So there's a myriad of things I look at on that Dallas defense I'm not in love with. So while I have problems with Green Bay and their offense, I think there's still ways for them to engineer some long drives to get some points on the board. And then on the other side, I still like that Packers defense a ton, and it's a Dallas offense that's going to be obviously down Amari Cooper and offensive line issues. So yeah, I like Green Bay in totality there against Dallas, but it could be an interesting one. I'm a big Eagles guy, so maybe Philadelphia steals this one at home. Aaron Rodgers owns Chicago Bears, so again, I got him getting both games there. Coming off the bye, I got him beating the Rams, but that game could totally go the other way, and that was one where I thought maybe that's the game I'll change to get them to 12, but coming off the bye at home, Monday Night Football, Aaron Rodgers on prime time is hard to bet against. So I'll go with the Packers there at home. The Dolphins could be another interesting one. But again, I love that secondary in Green Bay. So if there's a team that could slow down Tyreek and Jalen Waddle and Cedric Wilson, I think I feel pretty good, or as confident as I could be with any team with Green Bay. And then the Vikings and the Lions to round out the year. So got them at 13 wins once again, 12 totally possible, but that 12 to 13 window feels about Green Bay for this year. Then we get the Vikings, who right now my 7th seed, which means, sorry Dallas fans, you are the 8th seed. I think it's going to be close between those two sides though, and I actually have them both at 10 and 7, but more on Dallas later. For the Vikes, we already talked about week 1, then have them following up with a Monday Night Football road loss to the Eagles. Again, I'm high on them. This Saints game could go the other way. Again, if there's injuries in that secondary for New Orleans, then I'd probably pretty quickly pivot to Minnesota, because who's going to stop Justin Jefferson at that point? But this Miami game is really fascinating. Talent on the wide receiver position for Minnesota versus those corners in Miami. That's fun. Other side of the ball, it's kind of a disastrous cornerback room for Minnesota versus an awesome speedy duo. So absolutely at home, Miami could totally win that one. Bye week, I think the Vikings take care of business against the Cardinals this year. Had a gut-wrenching loss last year. Some revenge there. The Bills are just better. Sorry. And I think the Vikings also get some revenge on Dallas. They lost to Cooper Rush, filling in for Dak Prescott last year. And that's just so laugh out loud funny. But I think Minnesota gets some revenge there. Maybe this New England game is close, but again, I'm just worried about the perimeter talent on both sides there for New England. Can the wide receivers make enough big plays to take advantage of a weak secondary? I'm not convinced. And are there any corners on New England's roster that can check either Justin Jefferson or Adam Thielen? Feels doubtful. So I'll go with the Vikings there. This Lions game, I have them splitting with Detroit. That could totally be a sweep, but they did split last year. Had the Colts beating the Vikings. That could totally go the other way. So I've had some some Vikings fans tell me this team could win the division. They could be 12-5. I totally agree. Like if Green Bay stumbles out of the gate and they don't have a 13-win year, maybe they're 11-6. I could see Minnesota 12-5. Beating the division champs, and these maybe are the two games you flip then to get them there. You flip the loss to the Lions week 14 and a loss to the Colts week 15, and boom, you're 12-5. If Green Bay's only got 11 wins, then ergo the Vikings are the division champs. So I think there is a path. I think it's rather narrow though, but also I got them losing to the Bears in week 18. So that's an easily flippable game. So Minnesota fans, tell me what you think. Like how likely do you feel about winning the division title is? Because that bad man's still in the division and Aaron Rodgers. Let's move on to the Detroit Lions. Don't know what my screen was just doing there. That was weird, but I think this team right now, I have them hitting the over, but 6.5, man. Vegas is good at their jobs. If you've never been to Vegas, there's a reason those casinos look like they do. It's because they are good at their job and they make a lot of money off of normal folk. So 6.5 is spot on the money. That's exactly where it should be. So right now I got them hitting the over, but I don't know if I'll put any money on it. I'm not too confident in it. 4-2 in the division, which is an encouraging sign. So I have them sweeping the Bears and then splits against the other two, which maybe that's not all that likely against Green Bay. Maybe a little more likely against Minnesota, but some room for a potential loss there, and maybe that's what ultimately they don't split against Green Bay, and that's what moves them down to 6 wins. But I digress. Let's go through this schedule. Seattle, I think that's a winnable game, but two teams that are relatively close to one another, you could say. Maybe they put maybe a win in New England is what kind of puts Dan Campbell and the Lions on I don't want to say serious contender watch, but like this team's a year away. Like that's the game. It's like, hey, New England's going in the opposite direction. We're on the upswing. They're regressing, and you know what? Give us one more offseason. Let's find our franchise quarterback, and we're legit. So I could see that. But right now I got the Pats winning at home. Same thing could be said coming off the bye against the Cowboys. That could be a sneaky, quote-unquote upset road win there for Detroit. I am concerned about the Lions secondary, so I'm not entirely sure it happens against Miami, but maybe. I have them losing the Jags. That's a game that easily could flip. And that's the other interesting part is like if you give them a win against the Jags and this Patriots win, now you're talking about a team that's over 500, which, wow. I mean, considering the promise that they showed last year, but still were only a 3-win team. And then to really put it into context, this team that was, touting a rebuild that's going to take time. Be patient. It's going to take time in Detroit. But in 2 years' time, go from one of the weakest teams in the NFL that just traded Matt Stafford and then is over 500, that would be an unbelievable story. And at that point, the NFL would be fully on its knees praying and bowing to Dan Campbell because That is a job. That is a head coaching job if I've ever seen it. That is one hell of a turnaround if it were to happen that way. And also this Panthers game, that could be another one you flip. So maybe it's the Jags-Panthers game you flip and this team's over 500. I also haven't beaten the Jets. That could be an interesting one. We'll have to see on Zach Wilson, of course. And I have them sweeping the Bears. Justin Fields looked pretty good this offseason. If that carries in the regular season, maybe that's a split as well. But again, 7-10, just barely over the over. But also you look at some of these games I gave them as a loss, and maybe you're feeling good about the over because I have them losing to the Jags and the Panthers, and those might be winnable games in your eyes. So maybe you like the Lions over. I'm a little more skeptical. On to Chicago. This is a team I think should embrace a bad year. As much as Fields did look good this offseason, that's encouraging. I still have a ton of question marks about the offensive line and the wide receiver position, and outside of the secondary on defense and Roquan Smith in the middle at the linebacking spot, a lot of question marks for that defense because I also don't anticipate Robert Quinn standing on the roster the entire year. But, they also have a tough draw with San Francisco, Green Bay your first 2 weeks. That's rough. Got them with a win against the Texans. Then they have the Giants. Maybe you give them back-to-back wins there, or maybe you flip who wins what game. The Texans win, but then the Bears win against the Giants. Maybe, but then we're arguing over, a win one way or another. The Commanders, again, it's hard to predict when Carson Wentz is going to melt down. So maybe. Lions game. I have the Lions sweeping the Bears, so that's maybe one that you would add back into the Bears column. I also have them losing to the Falcons. Depending on who you think is worse of those two teams, it is in Atlanta, so maybe a slight edge there towards the Falcons, but that's also a flippable game, as is the Jets game. So this schedule isn't nearly as hard, so I think that's why the over-under right now is at 6.5 for the Bears, but yeah, I'm hitting the under on that one pretty hard. That's one of my favorite offseason bets. Them under 8.5, and then the Eagles over 8.5. Bears under 6.5, Eagles over 8.5, getting ahead of myself. Let's move on to the NFC West. I've been talking too long. I think this is a really good team, and you could totally flip this Bills game week 1 and give that to Buffalo, who I think most people will power rank higher right now. But I'm not going to bet against the reigning Super Bowl champs playing at home. I'll ride with the Rams week 1 opening night. So 12-5, 13-4 feels about right for Los Angeles. Obviously, the 49ers games are always going to be interesting. I do have them losing to the Bucs, but they beat them twice last year. That game could go the other way. Have them losing to the Saints. It's another 50-50 game. We're starting to get into repetitive territory because we've talked about a lot of these games. Green Bay is another one, so maybe you give the Rams, a win against the Saints, keep it as a loss to the Packers, or a win against the Saints and a loss to the Raiders, or a loss to the Broncos, or something interesting like that, or a loss to the Chargers here, maybe. So a lot of different ways to schedule a break, but they're 50-50 games for a reason. I got them at 13-4, and that 11-13 window, again, feels about spot on for the Rams. Then we get to the 49ers. I have them as my top wild card seed. I think it's just going to be a really good team. I know it's going to be a bit of a roller coaster for Trey Lance, but even if you lose some of the efficiency maybe, but gain more big plays out of it, I think you'll net out to an equal state there and have, relatively the same production one way or another, or just look a little different. But a couple of layups to start the year with the Bears and the Seahawks. That's a 2-0 start. Knock on wood if you're a 49ers fan. But then it gets obviously a lot tougher with the Broncos, and I think it's tough to play in Denver, this early on in the year, and it's a tough home field advantage one way or another. So I'll give the Broncos that one, but that one could go either way. Got them beating the Rams the first time around, then losing in week 8. Bye week, that takes them into a game against the Chargers. Maybe that's enough of that bye week, that extra week preparation. Maybe that's just enough of a factor to give them a home win. And then this Cardinals game, I have them splitting against Arizona, despite me liking San Francisco more. That could be a straight up sweep, and maybe you take away one of the wins for the Rams, give it to the 49ers, and boom, next thing you know, San Francisco is your division champion. So I think it's going to be really close between those two teams. I think it's going to be something we're talking about all the way down to the last week, maybe the last 2 weeks of the regular season. Moving on, this 49ers Dolphins game is going to be interesting. The Dolphins are just going to be an interesting team this year in and of itself. Raiders could make it interesting, but I do worry about their defense all in all against Kyle Shanahan, specifically that rushing attack, but also I like Jarvarius Ward, but Devontae Adams on the other side. So, yeah, that's a disadvantage. Then we get to the Cardinals. I expect a pretty substantial step back. I think they were 11-6 last year, so I basically have their record reciprocating and go the other way. But Kansas City, yeah, I'll take Kansas City there. Raiders, that one's probably 50-50, but I'll give the Raiders that one at home. Eagles I like better. The Rams I like better. The Vikings, the Cardinals got them last year. Let's say it flips back the other way. I have them splitting with the Seahawks. That might be a little generous to Seattle. So maybe if you're like, nah, Arizona wins at least 7 games, maybe that's one of the games you flip. But of course, there's also surprise games. So maybe this becomes a battle of offenses, Cardinals versus Chargers. And person with the last drive is Kyler Murray and the Cardinals, and they steal one there from LA. Also, this game coming off a bye at home, Monday Night Football, that could totally be a game that flips. And honestly, with my concern about the perimeter talent for New England, that is a game I look at and I'm like, nah, I'm not entirely sold on that pick, but NFL can be weird. So realistically, just looking this far in advance, assuming everything stays the same, I'd probably feel better about the Cardinals being the team that wins that game, coming off a bye at home, Monday Night Football. But, it's Bill Belichick, it's the Patriots. They're going to have a somewhat respectable record, so I gave them that game because I think these two teams are middle of the pack-ish. And I actually think I have them both 6 wins. Yep, I have them both at 6 wins. So I see them pretty evenly, obviously with different circumstances. But I'm going down a tangent here. Got to beat the Falcons, got to lose to the San Francisco 49ers to end the year. But yeah, I think a substantial step back, honestly. DeAndre Hopkins' suspension doesn't help. Interior offensive line concerns are still there, though I do like Will Hernandez as a breakout candidate. And then you added Trayvon Mullen, but that secondary is specifically at the outside corner spot still a little worrisome. And then edge, pass rush, that's going to be something that has to be sorted out once we get to the regular season. If they're better there, great. Then I feel better about this team. But I could see that pass rush being non-existent and then that secondary just left there to be burned. So, well, the way once we get in the regular season, but I do think this is going to be a downturn for Cliff Kingsbury and the Cards. And Seattle, real quick here, I think this team should embrace a bad season. I got them beating the Falcons, the Giants, and then the Cardinals, and then a pretty long losing streak to end the year. But it doesn't help when you have playoff teams like the Bucks, the Raiders, Rams, 49ers, a handful of those teams in your division, and even the non-division games, just tough draws there. Also, have them losing the Jets. That could be one that you flip the other way. Maybe Seattle at home takes that one. The Panthers game we noted earlier, maybe that goes into Seattle's favor. I have them splitting with Arizona. I don't think Seattle would sweep there, but I guess you can't rule it out. But giving them a win kind of feels generous, so I'll leave it at that. And I do have them losing to the Lions. I do like the Lions more, but maybe. But yeah, I think this team should be happy with the 3-win season because then they can go get their franchise quarterback at the top of next year's draft. On to the Philadelphia Eagles. Right now I got them at 12-5, so I did take 1 win away here from the Eagles, but right now, the 4 seed, which is amazing, a 12-win team is the lowest division title. Wow. But going down the schedule, I have them splitting with the Commanders. Division games are kind of weird. Overall 4-2 in the division. So also splitting with the Cowboys, but then sweeping the Giants. And, the NFC East weird, but that feels about right. Got them beating the Cardinals. That game could be interesting in Week 5. Week 8, again, I have them losing the Steelers. Maybe that's the game you give back to the Eagles to get them to that 13-win mark. Both times they play Washington. Revenge game for Carson Wentz. That's going to be tough to predict. Titans game here in Week 13. Maybe it could be a nice, grind-out, defensive-heavy type of game. I could see that. Do have them losing to the Packers, depending on that Green Bay offensive struggles, wide receivers. Maybe that opens up the door to steal that game, but not entirely sold on that. And then kind of a hot stretch, a lot of wins here from Week 9 onward. A loss to the Saints to kind of have them, get that last little hiccup out of the way, and then beating the Giants in Week 18. So I think this team is just, when you look at the roster as a whole, rushing ability of Jalen Hurts raises the floor a ton. Depth on both the offensive and defensive line. I think it's a really good roster, and Jalen Hurts has done nothing but improve. So while I may not think they are deserving of a 12-win record, I think they'll get there. They have the second easiest schedule in the NFL, too, and that's a huge part of it. So I've used the example of Steelers 2 years ago, started the year 11-0, finished the year 12-4. The Cardinals last year were the last undefeated team at 7-0. Were those teams as good as their final season record? I would argue no. Maybe the Cardinals were a little closer than Pittsburgh, but all in all, I would say no, those teams were not as good as their record. I think the Eagles could be that team this year, and we'll kind of hit on that once we get into the playoffs. Finishing out the NFC East, handful of teams more to go. Got the Dallas Cowboys if it would come up. There it is. I think they'll lose the Bucs week 1. They are at home. Could be interesting. They played them close last year, but I also think the Cowboys have regressed. Losing Randy Gregory. Again, Trevon Diggs is probably not going to have 11 interceptions, though I think he might become better in coverage, so it might even out there. But then the Tyron Smith injury, even if they sign a Jason Peters, that's probably a step backwards compared to where Tyron Smith was last year. Tyler Smith's a raw rookie, so that probably is going to end up becoming a net step backwards compared to Connor Williams. So it just feels like this team's taken, obviously no Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup's hurt for a chunk to start the year. So all in all, it just feels like this team's taken a couple steps backwards, and They were bounced in the first round last year. So I got them just outside the playoffs at 10-7, and really, I could see in a situation where we don't realize it in week 11, but this game between the Cowboys and Vikings decides it. And obviously, if you flip that game, if you think the Cowboys are a playoff team, I'd flip it and put the Cowboys in. That's your opinion. You have that prerogative, and that's great. I think I like Minnesota a little bit more to get in the playoffs, and that's the game. So we may not realize it in week 11, but I think that will be the game that we look at and we're like, yep, that decided who got that last playoff spot. Let's move on to the Commanders. Again, 7-10. We've talked about a lot of these games, so I'll go a lot quicker here. It's just going to be tough to predict, when Carson Wentz is going to be studly and when you get the bad roller coaster ride, when he's throwing left-handed interceptions in the end zone. So that's where a loss to the Texans could come into play, right? Like, if Wentz plays a halfway decent game, the Commanders are a better team. They'll win that game. But I had to give the Texans some wins. So there you go, Houston fans. But that being said, he could also have meltdown against a team that they're better than, because we've seen that before. And actually, we've seen it against the Titans. So maybe you're a Washington fan saying, hey, we're better than Tennessee. Tennessee, they lost so much. Missing pieces, you were just talking about it earlier. Yeah, I get it. But I could also just see that being a defense with a good secondary that gives Carson Wentz a lot of headaches. And then ultimately, too many turnovers, Commanders lose at home. The Vikings game maybe could be interesting. We'll see the state of that offensive line for Minnesota. If they don't build upon the progress they made last year, that game could be compelling. Have them splitting with the Giants over this 3-week period where they played twice, with them getting the home win after the bye. Maybe they'll sweep the Giants. And then this Cowboys game, maybe they can get both from Dallas. I'm not feeling great about that. But the offensive line injuries do kind of open it up a little bit. But I think that's going to be a split as well. And let's talk about the Giants, 4-13. I just think Daniel Jones is not going to end up being the franchise guy, despite me being relatively high on his weeks 1 through 4, 1 through 6 performance last year. He was elevating the trash can, the garbage fire around him. And as much as I like Brian Daboll, the offensive line should be better, but the wide receivers still do not inspire a whole lot of confidence in me. And all in all, even if I think Daniel Jones was outplaying the surrounding environment, eventually it came down to earth, right? And whether it's injuries or bad decision making / fumbles, Daniel Jones is going to Daniel Jones. And I think we'll see that eventually at some point this year. He might have some games where he looks pretty good, and you see what made the Giants want to take him at 6. But all in all, I just don't think it's going to work. So if you're higher on the Giants, maybe you flip this Panthers game. Maybe you flip this Seahawks game. I am definitely giving them some losses, some weaker opponents. You flip this Jaguars game. Like, I could see it. Like, if they beat teams that are bad, this team could be 7-10. They could be maybe 8-9 even. But I think this team's just bad too. And, as much as I talked about the offense there, the linebacking position is going to be an interesting fit for that Wink Martindale defense. Like, he likes to blitz those inside linebackers a lot. Is Blake Martinez or Tate Crowder the guys for that? Not entirely sure yet. And then it's also a scheme that relies heavily on the corners. So is Adoree Jackson up for that type of task? And after Adoree Jackson, who's that number 2 corner? Is Aaron Robinson, this drafted nickel corner out of UCF, ready to be a starting outside corner? He has the body for it, but will the play be there? I'm not sold. Not yet. I haven't obviously seen it in the regular season. That's going to be what makes the decision for me. So a lot of question marks from across the roster, and that's kind of what makes it tough to gauge for this team. All right, now let's run through my playoff predictions. I'll make this quick. I know this video is starting to get long. I didn't want this to be as long as last year's, which was 2 hours. So we're doing a little better there. I'll take the Bengals over the Colts, even though it's in Indianapolis. I just think it's a better team. Sorry. I'll have the Chargers scoring a win against the Chiefs. I'd just be compelled to see what the storyline is then for Kansas City going into the offseason. And also, it's about time the Chiefs lived up to the Chargers lived up to the hype. So let's give the Chargers a bone there. It's obviously early in the season, so it's hard to tell. I'll go with the Ravens. I'm pretty high on Baltimore this year at home. Let's see them knock out the Broncos. And then, like I said, I could see the Eagles being the team that their record's better than they are, then get bounced in the first round. I like the 49ers, though I do like that Eagles defense, so that'll be a really fun battle between those two teams. And it might be a low-scoring affair, because I like both defenses, honestly, in that game. And then you get Rams Saints. Let's go Super Bowl hangover. Let's go with another upset. Let's get the Saints into the divisional round, and then I'll take Green Bay over Minnesota. And then that takes us into the divisional round. Let's go Chargers over the Ravens. Let's make this the season of the Chargers. I'll take the Bills over Cincinnati. That game in Buffalo too can make it tough for Joe Burrow, and a below average NFL starter arm. He's great, but the arm might not hold up. Depending on the weather there. Green Bay, San Francisco, a rematch of last year. Man, let's come back to that. I'll take the Bucks over the Saints in the playoffs. And we get Green Bay, San Francisco. Let's say San Francisco does it again, man. Let's just go for it. And that way I don't have a 1-2. Ouch. That could go really either way. Let's go with Green Bay, and this will be my rationale. First year started Trey Lance in the divisional round versus Aaron Rodgers, as experienced and as savvy as it gets. So let's just say Jimmy Garoppolo. The reason he got the edge of him last year was because he's calm and he's actually pretty good in high pressure games, which is kind of weird for of all the moments. Jimmy G has had some solid moments. It's in those high leverage playoff games. So let's just say Trey Lance. First, and probably at this point, biggest game of his career. First time going into Lambeau in the postseason. That's a different atmosphere. Let's just say he falls short to Aaron Rodgers there. There we go. And that makes me feel better by having a 1-2 seed, but I am going to have the Bucks getting to the Super Bowl and the Bills on the other side. 1 seeds all around. I know. I'm a bum. It's chalky, but I'm going to take the Bills. Now, that being said, the caveat here is it is hard. And what could potentially be the last game of Tom Brady's career, having him go out on a loss, because that is just the last Tom Brady thing. That's the last thing you can say about Tom Brady. So I like the Bills. I think they're the best roster in the AFC. I think Josh Allen, he's my pick to win MVP for a reason. I think Sean McDermott's totally live in the Coach of the Year conversation. It's just a really good team, and they're about due. So that's part of it as well. So it could be the Bucks for the second time in 3 years. It could be the Bills for the first time in franchise history. I'd be happy either way if this is our Super Bowl, but at long last, that is going to do it for my updated season, record predictions, playoff predictions, and obviously Super Bowl pick as well. Tell me what you think down below in the comment section. Who do you have in the Super Bowl? Who do you got coming out? And tell me if you're a fan of one of these teams, which games you think could go the other way, and what record do you think your favorite team finishes the regular season with? Love to have your thoughts. Any football you want to talk, I respond to every comment, so let's make this a conversation down below. Hopefully you all enjoyed today's video. If you did, be sure to hit that like button. It really would help me out a ton. If you're new around here, want to see more sports content, just hit that big red subscribe button. That's going to do it for me. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is Tej. I'm signing off.